Data, the most ubiquitously distributed collection of information. It is all around us, and we see it every day. What we don't see is how it has begun to make every decision for us, whether we recognize it or not. They know you better than you know yourself. How? Data. Welcome to phase 2 of This is an Experiment. Hello. Welcome to phase 2 of This is an Experiment. I am your host, Adonis Tuman. A lot has changed since the very last episode of This is an Experiment, where we discussed reality and the facets that involve reality, such as consciousness, perception, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, Nick has stepped aside from co-hosting this podcast, so it will be just me. These are strictly due to personal life circumstances with work and so on and so forth. He's extremely busy traveling back and forth and can't really make time for the podcast. Totally understandable. We're totally cool. I talk to him almost every day. So for now, it will just be me and some guests that I bring on. And Nick can very well be a guest when he finds time. And eventually down the line, if he makes time and work allows it, and life kind of settles down, he might rejoin as a co-host. But for now, I am the solo host of This is an Experiment, and I am very excited to be back. And so for phase 2, things will be a little bit different. Ironically, as the name of this podcast suggests, within this podcast, we will be experimenting. So every episode won't be the same. I may have guests, I may not. I will just, for lack of a better term, experiment and see what sticks, what you guys like. I do run a few questionnaires on the Instagram, which is Experiment Podcast, to kind of gather some information for the episode that will follow. So for today, we will be discussing data. Data is a very interesting topic. It's become kind of a buzzword, really. And with these companies nowadays, tech companies, Facebook, Instagram, all these Google, all these different companies. What do they do with our data? What do they do with the information that they have on us? And a lot of questions arise about ethicality. Are they allowed to have all this information? Are they allowed to use this information? Well, technically, yes, they are allowed, because we are using their platforms, right? And so by using their platforms completely free of charge, for example, Instagram has a plethora of features. It allows you to post. It allows you to create a brand for yourself. You become the brand. And obviously, many successful businesses nowadays have flourished from Instagram or from Facebook. So if this is allowed, then why can't Facebook or Instagram? I mean, to iterate, Instagram is owned by Facebook. Facebook bought Instagram. So with that said, I know I'm kind of saying Facebook and Instagram when really they're one and the same, but just for the sake of specifics, I will be referring to them separately. So with that said, Facebook and Instagram operate under a guise that we are technically the product. Because we are not buying a product, we must be the product. Our data is the product. And ad companies, marketing companies are the customers. So the data that they collect from us gets sold off to marketing agencies, to ad agencies. And then from that, we get targeted ads. So there's a whole ethicality behind that. Should we be seeing these targeted ads? Why is it that when I talk about ice cream with my friends, suddenly I get an ad for Salt and Straw or Ben and Jerry's? Why is that? How is that possible? Well, good questions. And so to kind of elaborate and to kind of dive deeper, I ran a questionnaire on my Instagram. This was my personal Instagram, but I will be continuing to do these questionnaires on both my personal and on the podcast Instagram. So I asked, hello, you will be asked a series of questions regarding a specific subject. Answer truthfully and confidently. Thank you. And so the subject being data, I ask, question 1, is your data your property? I think that's a fair question. 54 people voted yes. 25 people voted no. So the majority believes, 68% of the people that voted believe that our data is our property. So we go on to question 2. Do you think companies have the right to target ads? 41 people said yes. 27 people said no. So 60% of the people that voted believe yes, companies have the right to target ads. That is a very interesting result. I was not expecting that. Although it is a lot closer than question 1, it's still interesting nevertheless. So let's move on to question 3. This is I kind of threw in a little ominous, eerie question. I ask in question 3, are they listening? Majority, 65 people said yes and 9 people said no. So 88% of the people that voted said yes. So there is an overwhelmingly large belief that these companies are listening to us, to our everyday, to what we type in Google, to what we say in our microphones when we are, sending a message or doing voice to text for whatever purpose, that yes, they are listening. So very interesting. So now let's go back to question 1. Is your data your property? I already kind of elaborated on this. My thoughts on this is no. I don't believe that data is your property. Why do I say this? Well, as an ambiguous and arbitrary area as it is, the terms of services kind of dictate whether or not your data is actually yours. And what I mean by that, every application, every company, every app that you download, before you are able to use its full features, before you're able to make an account, has a terms of service. I can bet you almost 100% of us, it's never 100, but almost 100% of us either scroll all the way down without even reading the first sentence, or if you don't have to scroll down, you just hit accept, because some applications require you to scroll down manually to hit accept. Otherwise, the feature or the button won't be active. So almost 100% of us probably don't read the TOS. Somewhere, and the people that do probably don't read all of it, because realistically, right? That thing is fucking long. I don't know who sits there in this day and age and reads the TOS. Of course, lawyers, I guess lawyers do. But that's besides the point, right? That those are outliers. The majority of people don't read the TOS. And somewhere in that TOS, it talks about what they do with your data. And these things have started to come out. You're starting to see a lot of posts, a lot of people on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, kind of highlighting TOS changes and the specific clauses where these companies basically what's the term I'm looking for? I can't think of the term. They relieve you of your rights to your data. There we go. Relieve, not render. They relieve you from your rights to your data and that they can do what they want. I believe, now don't quote me on this, but I believe on Instagram there was a point, I don't know if it still is the case, or again, if it was the case at all, that whatever photo you post or whatever video you post on Instagram, it was technically not your property, even though it's a photo of you or your family, your dog, whatever. The photo is no longer your property as soon as you post it on Instagram. Again, I'm not sure if this was verbatim, but I remember seeing something like this. I didn't really look into it further, but that was the case. So, question 1, is your data your property? I don't think so. I know that's kind of anti probably what the masses would think. Well, I mean, according to my questionnaire, the masses think that it is your property. So we're just going based off of that. So according to my questionnaire, the majority of people that voted believe that yes, it is your property. I say no. And those are the reasons why. So question 2, do you think companies have the right to target ads? This is kind of a gray area, right? It's weird. And this is why I say gray area. It obviously has pros and it has cons, right? Cons are, it kind of reveals that these companies are probably listening to you, right? Like we go back to the ice cream example. Why is it that, you talk to your friend about ice cream or whatever, and suddenly you're getting ads for it? Like how the hell is that possible? Well, again, it could be through a plethora of things. It could be through what you search on Google. We all know Google tracks everything you type, right? Collects it. It has your data. And then it uses your data to sell to these companies. What companies? Well, probably Instagram, probably Facebook. These giant tech companies, this is what they do. They collect that's where they make that's where Google makes its money from. Google doesn't make money from selling you things. Google doesn't really sell anything. Sure, you could say, oh, well, they make the Pixel line, the Chromebook, this, that. Okay. Well, do you really think that they are a multi-billion-dollar company off of selling cellular devices and laptops? No. Save it. So that's the con, right? That's kind of like that's kind of weird that they know all this. Sure, it is weird. But what's the pro? Well, you could look at this from a time perspective. You want something, right? They already know what you want. They know what you like. They have data points on you. By they, I am referring to tech companies and ad agencies and marketing agencies. They know what you like. And it saves you the time from going and finding what you like. They already know. They know what you want. And they will show it to you. And you will probably go buy it. Because, wow, this is really cool. I like this. The thing is, you might not know that you wanted it, but they know. They know that you will probably buy this. And so they show it to you. So I guess that's kind of a pro, right? It's still kind of ambiguous. It's still a little bit weird that these companies target ads, right? But I mean, I guess it's weird is because it's so personalized. And then we can extrapolate that, right? To, okay, well, now that genomics has become a big thing and, 23andMe and Ancestry.com and things like that, now they have your genetic information. They have every data point they need to know whether you are susceptible to this type of cancer, or you're susceptible to hypertension, or you're susceptible to, Alzheimer's, things like that. And then the worry is that 23andMe and these other companies, these genomic testing companies, will sell this information, this data on you to your insurance companies. And then now your insurance companies are going to start targeting ads at you for hey, you're susceptible to XYZ. There's a medication 1, 2, 3 for your disease XYZ. as a precautionary measure. You might not get it, but this is you could potentially get it. You have a high risk for it. Is it really that bad? Is that really bad? I mean, think about it, right? Health is probably the most important thing in existence, right? We need to be healthy. If we're not healthy, then we can't live. And if we can't live, then we are logging out of the simulation permanently. So, is it really that bad that these insurance agencies are targeting medication to us? Well, it could. It could be bad, right? But is it if in the long run it helps, right? Is it worth it? Is it worth giving your data to these insurance companies to sell you medication? Sure. And I can tell you why people might think so. Now that these companies have your information, they might deny you, right? They might deny you insurance. Oh, this person is high risk. We don't want him. Or whatever it may be, right? Whatever their policies, whatever are, we don't want him. Or we don't want her. So it could run a risk of fucking you over in the end, for lack of a better term, right? So that's kind of the gist of question 2. Do companies have the right to target ads? So again, 60% of people that voted said yes, they do. I'm kind of in the middle, but for the sake of what I was saying, I'll say yeah, they do. They do have, because remember, it's not do you think it's right? It's do they have the right? Technically, yes. Europe would enter the chat, but here in US right now, they technically do have the right. Question 3, are they listening? We kind of covered that. They could be. They could be. That's a big conspiracy, but they very, very well could be. So with this collection of data, with this massive network of just information constantly being gathered, constantly being conjured from these companies, what happens? Well, a lot of things can happen, right? And we've seen it happen a lot. Things such as persuading, elections in one way or another. Things like causing addictions, things causing a plethora of things, really, right? So to kind of shift away from data, now we look at persuasion, how we are persuaded without even realizing it. That is the key thing, right? We are being persuaded without, I guess that really is what persuasion is. Your decision making gets altered, through an external source, whatever it may be. Okay. So how does persuasion happen? Okay. So to better understand persuasion and to better understand addiction, because that is kind of the direction I am going with this, not addiction necessarily to drugs, but for this case, we'll stick with technology, right? How do we become addicted to our technology, to our cellular devices, to these apps? Because these apps want us to stay on them, right? They want us to stay on them so they can collect as much information. They want to wring us dry from our information, to collect as much data as they possibly can. How do they do this? Well, a lot happens. A lot happens, especially in our brain, in our mind. And the most important thing that they manipulate is something called our dopaminergic pathways. Whoa. What the hell is that? Dopaminergic pathways, dopamine, right? I'm sure everybody has heard the term and might even know what dopamine is. Dopamine is obviously neurochemical, and dopamine is considered the reward chemical. It's what rushes into your brain when you click a button or when you expect something exciting to happen, some reward. that feeling that is dopamine rushing into these pathways. There are 4 major pathways for dopamine, for the dopaminergic pathways. And 3 of those pathways are the reward pathways. So, what are those 3 pathways that we'll call them reward pathways? What are the 3 reward pathways? So, the first one is mesocortical. The mesocortical is responsible for memory, cognition, attention, emotion, behavior, and learning. Then there is the nigrostriatal. What is that responsible for? That is responsible for movement and sensory, your senses. And the final is mesolimbic. Mesolimbic is responsible for pleasure and reward-seeking behaviors, addiction, emotion, perception. Just based off of that, I can tell you that just based off of that information that I just gave, I can bet you that the mesocortical and the mesolimbic reward pathways are probably the most affected by our technology, right? And when these 3 dysfunction, in most cases of addiction, these 3 pathways that I just said, the mesocortical, the nigrostriatal, and the mesolimbic, are dysfunctional, and that's what causes addiction. In most cases, not all, most cases. So, what about these pathways? What happens exactly that causes you to want to repeat behavior, right? Because this is all about behavior. How many of you open your cellular device and automatically go on Instagram in the morning, or check Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok, whatever? How many of you do that? I can bet a majority of you do that. That is because it is learned behavior. You've learned to do that. You've learned it through these dopaminergic pathways. So what happens? How is it learned? How is information learned, or how is behavior learned? Well, there is something called the LTP, and the LTP stands for long-term potentiation. That is basically the connection, the strength of the connection between your neurons. So between your the tail end of your neuron and the dendrites, right? The stronger that connection is, the stronger the memory is, or the learned information, right? So let's say, a mathematician, his long-term potentiation for the neurons, his LTP for the neurons that are responsible for his, mathematic prowess. Those are probably the strongest areas in that individual's brain regarding mathematics, because the stronger the LTP is, the easier it is to collect that information. And how does it get stronger, right? That's ultimately the question. How does it get stronger? Well, the repeated exciting the neurons repeatedly, exciting those neurons, causing those neurons to have an action potential to transfer information back and forth. That is how LTP is ultimately achieved. And so, yes. So the dopaminergic reward pathways cause a strength between the stimuli and the behavior, whatever the behavior is, right? So the stimulus is, let's say, you got a message in your Instagram. The behavior is you go click the icon to go see what that message is. That is the behavior. The stimuli could be a notification. The behavior is clicking the notification to see what the notification is. So that is LTP. And that is ultimately how these companies persuade us or cause us to be addicted to our social media or to their apps, whatever it may be, right? And so this is kind of backed by there are frontiers in behavioral neuroscience, since we're on the topic of behavior. In the Philipps University of Marburg in Marburg, Germany, have researched this, right? And they say that social stimuli activate those dopaminergic pathways, the ones that I just discussed about, right? So social stimuli activate those dopaminergic pathways. For example, so how? Pretty much what I was saying, right? Things like happy faces, messages, notifications cause it. They cause the activation of these dopaminergic pathways. And the thing is, social media gives an endless amount of this, right? You post one photo, you'll get 50 likes, 100 likes. And I bet if you stay on the app and constantly refresh, a new like will come, right? One like, wait 5 seconds, you refresh it, 10 likes, refresh it. That what the app is doing, it is that, first of all, the application is the stimulus. For this example, you refreshing becomes the behavior. You seeing that you are getting likes causes a behavioral reaction to wanting it. You want that. It activates these dopaminergic pathways, and that is the reward, right? You want more, you want more, you want more. And ultimately this causes addiction. And what happens is, without it, you become depressed or you become addicted, right? You take a drug from an addict. What happens? There's a crash. Why? Well, because they're not getting their dopamine rush, right? That's what happens. That's the same thing that happens to people on their social medias. There are people that are genuinely addicted. They become this simulacrum that they have created in their social media. And without it, they feel as though they are nothing. And I kind of, both Nick and I went into this in the very first episode of the podcast called You. If you want to know more about that, go ahead and go listen to it. But we talked about that. We talked about how people have created an image, right, online. And this image becomes a reflection of them, an extension of them, rather. It becomes an extension of them. And if you take that away, you kind of remove the person that they have built up in this virtual reality, right? And if you take that away, of course, right? If you take something away from anybody, when it becomes their life, when it becomes something that more of habit rather than life, right? Life is a bit of an extreme. When it becomes their habit, when it becomes habitual, when you take that away, you become depressed, or that person becomes depressed. Love is the very same thing. You're in a relationship, you become so used to this person, it becomes a habit. Texting them in the morning, calling them at night, telling them good night, telling them good morning, seeing them, right? Being with them. When you take that away, when the relationship is broken up and these two individuals go their separate ways, they experience this form of depression, right? It is because the habit that they had within the relationship, the habit of the relationship, the habits are gone. So they experience this crash. Because what happens in the neurons is the receptors, right? The receptors in the neurons eventually require more and more and more of these neurochemicals to activate. That is the thing with a lot of drugs, right? These neurons create these receptors. And if those receptors don't become occupied, there is no action potential. There is no activation of that neuron. So that neuron remains dormant. So what happens? There's a crash. There's a crash in the psyche, really. And that is the truth. That is the truth behind social media. And kind of went off on a tangent there, but that's okay. That was that yeah. So that is a really long summary of how much psychology really is involved in these applications that we use, right? You know, that there's a lot involved in the UX and the UI that creates that keeps us coming back to it, right? The way that it's designed, it's not buttons aren't placed where they're placed just because. No. There's a science behind it. And if you, for example, remember Instagram, on the little dock at the bottom, right? There was the home button, the search button, the post button, the your activity button, and then the far right was your profile. Now they've replaced the post button with a new product called Reels. But we've created a habit, right? A behavioral habit to click that middle button to post, right? I mean, that's ultimately the entire premise behind Instagram, is to share posts. So when you click that button, it no longer goes to your camera roll. It goes to Reels. Why did they do that? Well, they did that so more people become exposed to this new feature that they have. It's to challenge TikTok. That's why they did it. That's why it's there. Because they exploit your learned behavior of the post button being in the center of the dock, and now switching it causes you to go to Reels. A lot of this could be viewed as now don't quote me on this, but a lot of this could be viewed as a bait and switch tactic within UX. There's something called dark UX, and it's basically the usage of manipulating individuals to do a task or to carry out an action that you want them to carry out. It's called dark pattern UX. And in this case, I believe it's called the bait and switch. Again, don't quote me on this. I would have to go and look deeper into it before doubling down on that. So, since we're on the topic of social media, persuasion, so on and so forth, I want to talk a little bit about social relations, right? Since social media seems to supply an endless amount of it, right? There is something called the Dunbar's number. So what is that? Dunbar's number posits that we can only maintain 150 connections at once. So at any given time, no matter how close or how far these connections are, 150 is the magic number. According to Dunbar and I hope I'm saying his name right, by the way. It could be Dunbar. We'll go with Dunbar. According to Dunbar and many researchers he influenced, this rule of 150 remains true for early hunters and gatherers societies, as well as a surprising array of modern groupings, things like offices, communes, factories. So way back when, to the days of hunter and gatherer societies, 150 has remained the magic number. And this is kind of broken down and it kind of becomes extrapolated. So typically, there are 5 loved ones. So it goes from the closest inside to the less close outside. So we start from the inside going out. 5 loved ones, 15 good friends, 50 friends, 150 meaningful connections, 500 acquaintances, and 500 people you can recognize. So big deal, right? Well, not really, because it applies to social media. How does it apply to social media, right? So because we are under this under Dunbar's number, we can only maintain 150 connections at once. So really, how many of these connections that we make with individuals on social media become meaningful in the end? I mean, chances are we probably recycle through a lot of different people, right? And it kind of causes, in a way, like ADD. If you think about it, it causes like an attention deficit. And this is seen like across the internet. Everything has become summarized. Everything is a headline. I mean, how many people really see an article, open it, and read it? I mean, I'm sure. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure people do. But we've all heard the term clickbait. How many of these headlines clickbait? And then in the article kind of doesn't say shit about what the headline said. And that's what I mean. Everything has become a summary, a headline. Like that is and it's just quick, like next. We got to go to the next one. We got to go red, next. And we're just hit with this overload of information. So this kind of relates to Dunbar's number. How many of these people are actually are meaningful relationships? Well, I don't know. Um, and to kind of go back, right? To kind of step away. I know we're kind of going down a niche road. To kind of step back from social media, right? To kind of get back into the realm of data or persuasion, rather. How many of you have ever experienced your phone vibrating in your pocket? You grab it, you turn the screen on, and there's no notification, no missed call, no text message, no new like, no new match, nothing. It's empty. The screen is empty. How many of you have experienced that? I've experienced it. A lot of people I know have experienced it. Why? This is called phantom phone sensation. And in the Sage journals, right, they did an analysis of 249 people, 112 being male, 137 being female, revealed that the majority of participants, 83.5% of them, so majority of participants have experienced phantom phone sensations. So what? Right? So what? This goes back to learned behavior. You have become so addicted, so a part of your cellular device, constantly clicking, constantly the buzzing from notifications, the buzzing from phone calls, from text messages. It has become almost like a, how do I put it? Now, I don't want to compare it to drug abuse because I don't know enough about drug abuse or drug addiction to really make a comment. But if just from based off the small amount of knowledge that I do know, I'm assuming that withdrawals cause some sort of a feeling of a high, perhaps when somebody gets off the drugs, when they haven't taken them, right? They have some tics about them. Something happens where they need the drug, right? They feel the kind of, what's the word? They feel this false sensation from the drug that they haven't had in their system, but they still feel it. It's like a residue sensation. It could be applied to this. It could very well be applied to our obsession with our cell phones, with our smartphones, really, right? So everything goes back to learned behavior. And that is ultimately how our data is collected. They've exploited the human mind, quite literally. They've exploited the human mind to wring us dry from our data. How did they do this? They made us addicted to these applications. They made us addicted to these devices. I mean, not now, because of the pandemic. But let's say in 2019, 2 years ago, you go out in public, how many people are really looking up? Let's say you're waiting in line for your food. How many people are looking up? How many of them are looking down on their small screen? Most. I mean, that goes without saying, right? Most are just so stuck to these screens. Now, I don't want to be a dad. Get off your phone at the dinner table, right? That's not the point of this episode. The point is to show you guys real world examples of how they have exploited the human mind to cause an addiction to these devices. And through this addiction, we are constantly on these apps, constantly interacting, and constantly giving them the data. And ultimately, that is the premise behind this episode, right? Because persuasion and data go hand in hand perfectly. And companies know this. Kind of goes back to the whole dark UX. Dark UX is a vector of attack that they use. It's a deceptive UX, UI interaction designed to mislead or trick users to make them do something that they don't want to do. And obviously, a whole bunch of tenets follow what dark pattern UX and UI is, right? If you guys want some real world information, I'm sure we've all heard of Cambridge Analytica. For those of us who haven't, I suggest you guys go and listen to Cambridge, or go and watch The Big Hack, I believe it's called, on Netflix. And I also recommend everybody goes and watches The Social Dilemma on Netflix. These things talk to us about, or in those documentaries, they talk to us about a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about right now. Cambridge Analytica was a firm in the UK or in England, and it helped a whole plethora of people to collect data on them. So, for example, let's go to Trump. Trump apparently used Cambridge Analytica. Things like drain the swamp, crooked Hillary, make America great again. All these phrases were a result of Cambridge Analytica. How? Facebook. That's how. What about Facebook? I'll put it like this. As of December of 2015, by the way, Cambridge Analytica is no more, right? They got busted big time. Again, I implore you all to go look into this and do your own due diligence and research. So, as of December of 2015, Cambridge Analytica claimed to have collected up to 5,000 data points on over 220 million Americans. 5,000 data points. They knew you better than you knew yourself. So what did they do with this information? They looked for those that were politically on the fence, swinging both left and right. They targeted them and persuaded them in such a way to move them to one side or to move them to the other. This is ultimately a real-world example of how data is used to cause persuasion, and how persuasion is used to collect data. It is one and the same, really. It's two sides of the same coin. It's a binary system. Data is used to persuade, and persuasion is used to collect data. That's really it's the snake eating itself. That's really what it is. And this persuasion is seen across the internet, right? For example, they talked about this in The Social Dilemma. You go on Wikipedia, right? You search something, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter what you've searched up previously, or what your internet history, your cookies, your cache, it doesn't matter what that looks like. If you search something up on Wikipedia, it will look the same for every single person. It will have the same information for every single person. But if you search up something, for example, on Google sometimes, depending on what you've searched up before, depending on your location, there's a chance that the answers that we see may be very different. We are in an era of disinformation, and it was brought to light through COVID-19. COVID-19 has left a wound, or rather exposed the wound of disinformation. And it has exposed just how important data is, and just how important data is for persuading, right? So that is ultimately the premise of what I'm trying to get to, the kind of climax of this episode, really. Data is everywhere, right? We can't escape it. We use, our social medias, and we just send out data constantly through text messages, through photos, Snapchat, TikTok, you name it. Data is involved. Data isn't the problem. It's how data is used, for good or for worse, right? And that is ultimately the what I'm trying to get to. I mean, yeah, that's really it. It's looking back, right? We if we all look back, this is what I was trying to say. If we all look back, we could see the persuasion. We've all been persuaded, first of all. We've all been persuaded in one way or another through these applications to make either a purchase, to do something that we probably wouldn't have done. And that is a direct result of the way that our data is used. So, with that said, should there be some sort of data laws, as there are in Europe? And in Europe, I forgot the exact name of the exact name of the law. It's called the European General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. And so what happens in this law is that the personal data that is collected, and if it's used or transferred, it has to have kind of how do I put this? It has to remove any relation with you. It has to just be data, like raw data. It basically total anonymization. Like it can't have any trace of who this data belongs to. And I believe that that is a step in the right direction because the data right now here in America, they can use it however they please. And it has your information. They know who you are. That's why Cambridge Analytica was able to collect over 5,000 data points on over 220 million Americans. Any idea what you could do with that information? I mean, we saw it. We saw what it could do. So, I leave you with this. Should something be done about this? Should there be some sort of regulation in this grand experiment of data? And that is all. Remember, this is an experiment.